Hi, my name is JJ. Welcome back. I'm doing my quarter one wrap up for Historathon. I was able to finally finish Pontius Pilate by Wroe this month, and I also listened to Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff. And maybe because I read them both at the same time, I was able to see a lot of parallels and comparisons between the two. I enjoyed both of them a lot. I really always have been fascinated with Cleopatra, so reading more about her life and her history and kind of dispelling some myths and stuff has been really fun. You get the context of Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Mark Antony. You get Herod in there a lot. You get kind of her family history and dynamics. You get a bit about her, and as she was Macedonian Greek, kind of what her culture would have taught. She was very well educated, spoke multiple languages, one of the only Ptolemaic pharaohs who actually learned to speak Egyptian, which was a very unique thing for her family and leadership to do, which makes it a lot easier when you're trying to have wars and talk to your commanders and stuff, being able to actually communicate in their language. Yes, it was she learned the language of those she was oppressing, which is controversial itself, but just the fact that she took the time when so few people didn't was interesting. I liked learning about what would have been the stuff that she had to learn and do as a woman, as well as a woman in power. And what is interesting, I completely forgot in all my wrap-ups that I also listened to the women who ruled, and that was about 5 pharaohs. So you learn about Nefertiti, and how her husband was actually one of the followers, founders or whatever, of one of the first known fanatic religions. He was a religious fanatic, and she had to kind of temper that amongst her people. And then you have Hepeshet, who ruled and did a lot and was very progressive, and how she had to kind of navigate the world of men, and so then she became the woman who became king. And then also you get Cleopatra among 2 others, and I forget the names of those. But what was interesting is they talked about how Egyptians would allow women to rule rather than like a warlord or a conniving male family member. They would let the mother or sister or someone within the immediate family bloodline rule to prevent war. And they understood that having a woman in power would temper war. And so they were very unique among a lot of the ancient cultures that we like to talk about that gave women no rights at all, whereas they understood that men were ironically the emotional ones, the ones quick to anger and quick to want to cause war. So once they needed to have stability, they understood that it was time to allow for the power to pass on to a woman, which was interesting. And so I really enjoyed that. I forgot to write that in my wrap up, so I will write the author of that. It was really good. And then going back to Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff, you get kind of a little taste of it in The Women Who Ruled, and then you get a more in-depth description of her life and her relationship, and how essentially they like to say that she was the one who destroyed the men, but it was the men who essentially were her downfall. It reminded me a lot of Mary Queen of Scots and how her need to produce an heir, to remarry so quickly after losing her first husband, Prince Francis of France, and how that eventually became her downfall, or her part of her downfall, as she returned to Scotland and married all the wrong people. And so Cleopatra did that as well, trying to increase her power as she married or had relationships with influential people. She knew that having children with them would firm them up, and give her an option to peacefully, in her opinion at the time, try to increase power and stabilize the bloodline. What was interesting as well is a lot of people prior to her, all the pharaohs and stuff, used to basically incestuously marry and have children, which was a problem for some of the dynasties. Basically became sickly. They died out, and they didn't have anyone to marry, and it kind of weakened the line rather than strengthened the line. And then you had some random pharaohs who outlived all of their children, even though they had lots of concubines and lots of children by multiple wives, all to try to strengthen that line. It became weaker, or they didn't survive beyond adulthood, and the father then had no heirs, which then is how sometimes it passed to women. So Cleopatra did a lot of things differently, but she brought a lot of prosperity to Egypt, and it's very hard to determine when you try to fix in currency exchanges and inflation and all that. But they said, trying to take in effect as much as they could, that she would have been worth around 95 or over 95 billion. And she brought that prosperity to her people, and was well loved amongst her own, the ones that she ruled in Egypt. She was an outsider to Rome, and they villainized her. And so a lot of the stories that we hear come from her enemies. So it's very biased on what we learn. And not just as a foreigner, not just a foreigner in power, but a woman. And so that was really interesting to read about, to the very point of how we even believed this ongoing myth about how her suicide was by a snake, either the Egyptian cobra or the asp, which is usually what's talked about. But the author pointed out how women in history who were villainized often were associated with snakes, snakes meaning the devil. They essentially got their power or their control over men by dealing with the devil, way back to Adam and Eve, with Eve listening to the serpent and taking the forbidden fruit, Medusa, and then she had the snakes for hair, once again showing that she was the villainess in the story. And then you have Cleopatra being associated with snakes, which the people at that time and the Christians who came after knew that to mean that she was the villain of this story, which I thought was very fascinating and profound way to look at. And then you get to see also the way that she's portrayed later in media. Once again, always written as the cautionary tale, always written as this seductress, conniving person for power, and very one-dimensional. You don't get to see the wholeness of her story. You don't get to take the context within it, and you have it written by people who were biased in what they were trying to sell as their point. So whether they were doing plays about her and wanting to show some people up and condemn some people, which even with Shakespeare, he wrote this the play Julius Caesar and had no real villains in there. He had all of them completely three-dimensional, tried to show you all sides of the story, and then he went and did Cleopatra and made her this almost one-dimensional, just stereotypical female of the story that didn't really have a whole lot of autonomy herself. It felt really flat, and I really was disappointed by that play. But it just shows you throughout history how she's continuously misrepresented and portrayed. And so that all being told, when I finally got into Pontius Pilate, there was so many parallels because Pilate was then seen once again written by his enemies throughout history. So he is always seen as the oppressor. He represents the strong arm of Rome against the Jews at the time, against Jesus at the time, who was innocent, and so therefore Pontius Pilate was the villain in killing an innocent man. And so he throughout history has also been portrayed as the rallying point for all kinds of cultural and societies who want to rally behind a representative of the people who are oppressing them, the people in power. And he was the representative chosen. They didn't choose Tiberius. They didn't choose any of the other Caesars. They didn't choose kings. They chose Pilate to be their villain. It talks about all the different narratives that you do. There's lots of plays that featured him once again as this conniving, horrible villain in the story. You have the Master and Margarita, which tried to make him in an interesting way, but still had him as just this person who didn't understand and who saw Jesus as a crazy man. So there's paintings and everything that portray him. When you're wanting to get angry at something, people point out Pilate. And I just find it fascinating that both Pilate and Cleopatra were in the same time period-ish, but one was against Rome and one was the representative of Rome, and both, based on who wrote about them in the future and contemporarily, used them as a rallying point for them being the villains, them being the other. And so you can't really win. And both of them didn't get to be fully them in their own stories. They lost their identity. They lost who they really were. They lost their voice. They lost their dimensionality, and became this stereotype of oppressive power, or basically manipulative, seductress woman villain. Either or, it wasn't what they were, but it was what they became, and they became mythized for it. And I found the parallels very fascinating. What I also enjoyed, and it did take me a while to get into the book, because at first there's so little about Pilate, especially his early life. So it was this could have been, and then that could have been, and it was a lot of basically guessing and plausibleness. But as they got more into what his position would have been in Judea, and what his role as leader would have been, his interactions amongst the Jews prior to, especially the high priests and stuff, and how he had to basically toe the line between representing Rome, but also appeasing the Jews who were in power there, and not wanting to have like a war on his hands. So it was really interesting when it got into that point of view. But it also did show all the different ways he's represented in media, and kind of went into more detail about his association with the Jewish elders, the high priests, what their role was within society, where the Jewish people fit within Rome. So you got all this extra context. You got kind of what Jesus represented, where he would have come from. And what I found really interesting is the way that they use him for power. And I tried to I didn't highlight any, but I did try to take a couple of highlights in here if I can find them really quickly. But essentially, there's this belief, and so Tolstoy was huge into Pilate, into religion and understanding, and so he was trying to promote this painting that he thought was really important, because he saw Pilate as the oppressor, just like he had oppression in Soviet Russia. And like I said, he became a rallying cry against all the things you're fighting for. And so in here, it talked about how when he says, "What is truth?" and he mocks Jesus by saying, "What is truth?" It talks about how people more intelligent, more learned, and more refined than himself and his Jews have thought about the word, which is truth, and have decided long ago that it's impossible to know what truth is, and that truth is an empty word. And so the idea that he spoke to that one word, and now how in the United States we have all these alternate facts, because there are two truths or two sides of every story. It's about the people in power making fun of truth, because once you try to say something that is true, it gives it power. And so by taking away the definition of what is true, you take away that argument. And so that's what he was essentially saying Pilate was doing with that question. And then you also have in here, and I'm sorry I'm not finding it well enough, but when you take away the power of truth, so right here it says, "Martyrs know truth, and by dying for it, proclaim how strong it is. But if the tyrant toys with the truth, queries it, worries it, refuses to grant its importance, and spares men the theatrical satisfaction of dying to uphold it, he remains the strong man, and they become the fools." So I think that was a really interesting way to interpret just one sentence that Pilate supposedly spoke. And then I wish I did highlight these, because there's some really interesting things that I found in here. I'm sorry for this. Where is it? And then so why does it always crucify? So when you talk about defiance and civil disobedience, and this is by Thoreau, why does it always crucify Christ and excommunicate Copernicus and Luther and pronounce Washington and Franklin rebels? So once again, they're talking about standing up against oppression and for truth. And so when the government could never learn to cherish its rebels because it could not accept that pointing out the faults or absurdities in the system might be wisdom rather than sedition. I just really liked that line as well. And obviously it also talks about Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, where it's the Inquisitor speech, where it's the famous speech within the story of, gosh, I wish I remembered it. Basically, it's a Jesus comes back and he's in prison and he has this conversation and about why he's here and what it means, and if it's going to be beneficial for him to have returned during the Spanish Inquisition. And then there used to be, so I always wondered when they, you know, if those who don't know the story, they mock Jesus by putting a crown of thorns on his head, blue or the purple robes, and call him king. They even crucify him by saying he's the king of the Jews. And so I did not realize that that's actually a historical game that people used to play, and where basically the poor regular soldiers, common men, for a day they got to play king, and it became like this party game that they played. And so they were mocking Jesus with this, mockingly calling him king, but in a way that they were saying, for a day you can be king because you're just a commoner, you're a nothing, and that is part of that game, which I didn't realize and I found fascinating. It's also really interesting how the Romans saw crucifixion as one of the worst things that could happen, and that is the way that they chose to then crucify Jesus as his punishment, and that is essentially saying that he is the worst of the worst. He's just a common thief, common criminal, because that's what they did, is they crucified them, and they had to have watched people there, because people would try to save their family members, try to take them down off the cross, save them from that punishment, or even just bury their bodies with dignity. So they actually had to have people to guard these bodies, which was another thing that I didn't realize. And just how throughout history people became so obsessed with the story of Pilate, intertwined with the story of Jesus, that they tried to figure out what kind of tree he was buried on. And there's all these different stories and legends about how the tree was actually one that was taken from the Garden of Eden, that was the fall of man, but was taken by Seth, who was the child of Adam and Eve, who buried his father next to it to try to redeem that tree. And then just so many different stories of people trying to really create a whole story around like all the aspects, like what kind of crown of thorns was included, that it was used on his head, what kind of tree was that, what kind of tree was the cross, what kind of fabric were the robes, like all this different stuff. People have been trying to understand things like that for history, or throughout history, and coming up with their own myths to it. And in doing so, it continuously ramps up Pilate as a human villain, and just kind of elaborates on his myth. And you know, he wasn't really all that memorable in Roman history. We only hear about him in his history regarding his associations and stuff with Jesus and the crucifixion, and not in Roman society at all. So I find that fascinating that he was the strong arm of Rome, and yet he was not relevant enough in Rome to have them be the ones who told his story. It was his enemies, just like with Cleopatra, it was her enemies that continued her legend and her story. So anyway, long rant, but I just really liked the parallels between Cleopatra and Pontius Pilate, and having read the women who ruled before Cleopatra, I also got to learn about a little bit of the history and context going into Cleopatra's rule. Anyway, it was a great month of history reading. I really enjoyed this. This is probably one of my favorite quarters in regards to Historathon. I really enjoy the ancient cultures. So I don't know how much more I'll do within the other ones, whereas I've had some really great reading these last 3 months. I posted multiple videos and wrap-ups for that. But I do intend to continue throughout the year with Historathon, but I definitely have really enjoyed and prefer this early history of the world, especially prehistory. And so like Pontius Pilate was in early 0 to 30s 30s central or common era is when he dealt with Jesus. So he had been in Rome prior to that, so very turn of the millennium, I guess. And fascinating information. There is a lot at the end that are all like there's a lot of index and bibliography and the references and stuff that she made to all of the plays mentioned, the myths mentioned, the different paintings and stuff. So there was a lot of information in this book, and like I said, it did start very dense, but it got extremely fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend all 3 of these books, and I look forward to starting quarter 2 of Historathon. Thank you, and have a fantastic quarter of reading.